This is the demilitarized zone that separates North Korea from South Korea. And it's well protected with heavy barbed wire fences, minefields, and it is meant to prevent any incursions by the enemy. And as you can see, it's still serious business. This is a South Korean guard post in the demilitarized zone, and it's a very tranquil and quiet place. But that really belies the truth, because less than 2 kilometers away is North Korea. And beyond their borders are more than 1 million North Korean soldiers who are poised to potentially attack the South. And on the southern side, more than 600,000 South Korean soldiers are awaiting such an eventuality. But what's amazing about these hills is that in 1951 to 1953, more than 20,000 Canadians served here, exactly in this position.
The night seems to be so long, you think the sun is never going to come up.
You imagined all kinds of things in the dark. I mean, you're standing there by yourself, and the other guy in a slit trench.
Your nerves keep you on edge because you know that there are people out there. It's a waiting game and you're waiting for the inevitable.
We're driving through Seoul, and Seoul is one huge, vibrant city. It's very modern. I don't see any buildings that date over 30 years, more or less any will date back to the Korean War. All I've seen of Seoul are the old archival photographs, which really shows the place as a ruin. So it's going to be interesting to try to find out what remnants of the Korean War we can find. This is the National Cemetery in Seoul, and it's an enormous and beautiful place, and you can see why they call it the spirit of the nation. We often think of the Korean War as being somewhat small. When you come here and see the enormity of the suffering of the Korean people, you get a better understanding. There's a building just ahead that is even more poignant. It's the Memorial to the Missing. This is a very moving place. It lists the names of more than 100,000 South Korean troops who were missing during the Korean War. And what's even more powerful is this, the floral tributes, the photographs of the soldiers. These men have not been forgotten. During the Korean War, 21 nations, including Canada, came to assist South Korea. But the question remains, why were Canadians fighting in a country that no one had ever heard of? In August 1945, the Americans dropped atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and the Second World War came to an end. But the period afterwards became one of turbulence, as our old ally Joseph Stalin started to absorb countries in Eastern Europe. And an Iron Curtain descended across that area, and it appeared that war was going to occur. In 1949, Mao Zedong's communists defeated the Chinese nationalists, and the focus of the Cold War turned to Asia. There was a possibility of war between Communist China and Formosa, but no one dreamed anything would happen in Korea. But they were wrong. This is the grave of a South Korean soldier killed on June 26, 1950. He was one of thousands of South Korean soldiers killed in the North Korean invasion.
The Asiatic crisis point becomes Korea. Korea and its southern capital, Seoul, where violent warfare reached its peak following invasion from the Red-dominated north. The Blitz-like attack slightly more than 700 air miles from Tokyo saw the Russian-backed North Korean army roll down past the 38th parallel, the line of demarcation between the communist stronghold and the Southern Republic. In the capitals of the globe, there were undisguised uneasiness and grave concern that here might be the prelude to a wider atomic conflict.
The UN immediately condemns the brutal invasion and demands a complete withdrawal of all communist forces. The North Koreans ignore the warning, and by the 27th, they are poised to capture the South Korean capital of Seoul. This is the Han River, and today it separates North Seoul from South Seoul. But in 1950, Seoul was a much smaller city, and it was completely on the north side. And there was only one bridge across the Han River. In late June 1950, the civilian population heard about the great successes of the North Korean invading army, and panic set in, and their only way out was this bridge. Throughout June 26th and June 27th, tens of thousands of refugees crossed this bridge, fleeing to the south. By the 27th, it was clear that Seoul was going to fall to the North Koreans. And although the bridge was full of thousands of refugees, the South Korean army had to make the hard decision to blow the bridge. The destruction of the Han River Bridge kills more than 800 South Koreans, but stops the North Korean tanks from advancing. Now, those remaining in Seoul are trapped and at the mercy of the approaching communists. Among them is a 22-year-old student, Kapyong.
That morning, before noon, I didn't know. Rumor is around the Han River gone, exploded. And then, no way out. Now I cannot get out. Around 10 o'clock on the street, tanks coming, so everybody, now the North Korean here. So many bodies in town, and they cut up the bamboo shoot, they kill that. They don't need any ammunition. Only I saw 2 eyes out by the bamboo shoot. I saw that. And finally, I asked with my friend, let's go, get out Seoul. I made red band, looks like a communist, and a special mission. Many people lined up to waiting the ferry. I asked who in charge of here. Somebody, the North Korean communist. So I told him, very low voice, we are special mission to South. That's why we get the boat, cross the river, and when the bandits were out, let's go to, we are now free.
Kapyong Chi joins tens of thousands of others fleeing the communists. Within days, the North Koreans bridge the Han River and continue south, pushing back the remnants of the South Korean army. It's now clear that South Korea will cease to exist unless someone comes to their assistance and comes quickly. Okay, we're driving on the main highway just north of Seoul, and in this position, the communists are just about a kilometer on the other side of the river. And this area is critical to any advance that the communists would want to make, so there are a large number of tank obstacles located on the highway. And the overpass we're coming up to is one of those tank obstacles. It looks like a commercial sign and a regular overpass, but it's not. It's actually huge slabs of concrete suspended above 3 columns. And what would happen is, in an emergency situation, they would blow the columns and these large slabs of concrete would come down and provide an obstacle for any communist armor. After the capture of Seoul in June 1950, communist troops led by T-34 tanks moved south, crushing all opposition. The situation deteriorates so quickly, the UN is forced to act. It realizes if it does not get troops on the ground immediately, South Korea will be lost. Throughout July, thousands of Americans arrive in Korea and are quickly thrown into battle. But their numbers are insufficient to stem the momentum of the communist advance. By early August, the Americans and South Koreans are beaten back and on the verge of defeat. They will make their final stand defending a small corner of Korea known as the Busan perimeter. This is the Nakdong River, and in the summer of 1950, it was the western wall of what was known as the Busan perimeter. Busan perimeter was all that was left of South Korea, and the North Koreans had every intention of crushing that position. On the west side of this bridge were the North Koreans, and on the east side were the ROC Army. And they would face off in one of the most decisive battles of the war. We're very fortunate to have found Mr. Kim. He served with the 1st ROC Division, which is the Republic of Korean Army, in 1950, and he fought at the 38th parallel, and he fought here on the Nakdong River.
저건 강건 내에서 저 낙동강 건너에서 추궁을 하고요. 물로 기도라 물로 막 돌아. 그때 물이 참 깊었어요. 강물이 물로 돌아오는 게 언제나 깊어놓은 게 돌아오지를 못합니다. 강원대 좀 돌아만 우리는 여기서 사기를 일을 하지요. 초만 좀 죽지요. 뭐. 당시 이 낙동강 물이 처음에는 말이죠. 막혔습니다. 물이 막혔는데 나중에는 한 달간 더 들어가고 나니까 낙동강 물이 벌겠어요. 얼마나 많이 죽고 났던 또. 예.
The North Koreans attacked with superior numbers of tanks and men. But after weeks of fighting, they still cannot crack the UN line. This incredible defense is assisted in large part by the Americans' complete domination of the air. Each communist attack is punished by devastating airstrikes of napalm and high explosive.
이제 태국 우리로서 태국을 우리 구인들 태국 먹고 급파를 못했습니다. 강원내에 접대 있으니까 저 건너에 있고 하니까 비행기를 폭격을 했는데. 참 심하기 때문에 저기 많이 희생이 많이 돼버리고, 예, 우리 국군에도 큰 도움이 됐죠. 예. 날라갔죠.
On September 15, 1950, the Americans deliver a decisive blow with the landing of 70,000 Marines at Incheon. Over the next 6 weeks, the UN destroys the North Korean army and advances towards the Chinese border. But just when complete victory is in sight, the tide of war once again turns. On November 26, 1950, 200,000 Chinese communist troops attack the UN forces and catch them by complete surprise. Within days, the UN forces are in full retreat. The communists inflict terrible casualties on the UN forces and drive them back 200 miles into South Korea. The question of how to deal with the Chinese intervention, whether to strike at targets in China or even use nuclear weapons, paralyzes the American government. The world stands on the brink of total war. It is during this desperate period the first Canadian troops arrive in Korea.
We're on a Korean Navy patrol boat just off the port of Busan, or Busan as it was called during the Korean War. Today you can see it's a very busy port in a city of about 4 million people, but that's not the way it was during the Korean War. Busan was the port of entry for most Canadians arriving from Japan. It's about a 200-kilometer trip across the sea. And of course, as the men arrived, they would go by the exotic islands, the fishing boats, and see that this was truly a strange land.
Miles off the coast of Korea, barely able to see land, we smelled it. Night soil used on rice paddies was one of the ingredients. I suppose plain old garbage from the port of Busan contributed to the odor. Someone on deck remarked that if the world needed an enema, they would no doubt insert the tube here. Hours later, we docked in Busan. So this is Korea.
The first group to come over were the 2nd Patricius. And when they arrived, they were met at the port and quickly put into trucks and taken out into hills for training because they were about to participate in the upcoming United Nations offensive against the communists.
The 2nd Battalion PPCLI is fortunate to have an experienced commanding officer, a highly decorated Second World War veteran, Lieutenant Colonel Jim Stone. Stone puts his men through 6 weeks of rigorous training, hoping it will be enough to prepare them for the tough fighting ahead, in difficult terrain and against an unknown enemy.
There seems to be a whole pile of, of false peaks.
Yeah. I know where we crossed the valley floor. It wasn't very wide.
We are traveling through central Korea trying to find the route the Canadians took on their way to join the UN offensive in early 1951. With me is Dave Crook, who has returned to this part of Korea for the first time to try and retrace the steps he took as a 19-year-old private with the 2nd Battalion, Princess Patricius.
What we're going to do now is we're going to try to find a village called Chomni. And really, Chomni is the jump-off point for the Canadians in the Korean War. So, Dave, this is Chomni, where you first came into the line. Do you recognize it?
Not really. I mean, types of buildings are the same, but I don't recognize them. We weren't here that long.
What do you remember about going into the line for the first time?
Well, just up here. Well, when we first got here, before we bedded down for the night. We turned and looked out into the field here, and there was Americans that had been slaughtered by the Chinese. It was probably 50 or 60. Never counted them, of course. But they were all caught in their sleeping bags.
At first, I didn't really understand what it was, and people started saying, look it. Most of the guys were half out of their bags, some not even out of their bags, some out of their bags completely.
They shot them all, yeah. They just killed them all. They had no guards posted, no nothing. They just went to sleep. They thought they were in some kind of Disney World or something. I don't know.
They thought they were safe.
Yeah, I guess they just figured that the war was like way up there somewhere. That's about the first time I realized that the seriousness of what I'd gotten myself into. You know, I joined the Army because I was mad at my girlfriend. And here I am now. Somebody's maybe going to take a shot at me, and I'm not sure I really like that. I'm questioning my wisdom quite a bit at that time. In fact, all that night and the next morning moving out, I'm thinking, Jesus, what have I done? You know, and I'm sure I wasn't the only guy thinking that way.
On February 21st, 1951, the UN begins its offensive with the Patricias leading the advance into the hills. They meet little opposition, and it appears the Chinese are fighting a delaying action to cover a full retreat. For the untested Canadians, it will be their first taste of the treacherous Korean terrain of steep mountains in cold winter conditions. We're going to try to find Hill 419, which is where the Patricias had their first real action in February 1951. It's a whole pile of these hills. Here's a saddle over here. Look at there. I bet you that's it. So this could be our baby over here. That looks like it there.
Could be. It depends what's up here. I think around the bend there.
Okay, we'll go up a little further. Because we came back.
It wasn't that hill. That's too high.
But that means.
Yeah, that looks more like it.
Okay, we'll get in. Let's go back and try it one more time.
Okay.
So you think that this is it?
Well, it sure as hell looks like it.
I thought you said you came down the valley and attacked up the other side.
No. We came down this way and up this way.
Okay.
This is the hill I think we went up and dug in that night.
404.
Whatever this hill is, I have no idea. But this is the hill that I think is 419. But I could be wrong.
So you think this is it?
It sure looks like it to me. I mean, it all fits. It's about the right height. Saddle's there. The other company was dug on the reverse slope there.
Okay, come down here and show us where
And
you
we were up here.
Show me we were dug in, how it's set up.
Yeah, well, we were dug in on that ridge line up there. When I get up there, the first night in the line, and platoon commander comes along and says, "Come on with me." I said, "What do you want?" He said, "We're going on a recce." I said, "Wait a minute, I just got here." I said, "Somebody else must have more experience." He said, "No, you're going and the radio man." So we came down this draw here, crossed the valley floor, and went up that draw there, I don't know, maybe 200 yards up there, and came back up the hill, and got up the top, and I thought, oh, geez, I did a great job. first light comes, platoon sergeant comes along and says, platoon commander wants to see you. Oh, what have I done now? So I go down and he said, since you were down there with me yesterday, you can lead the company. Holy shit, I just got here and here, what am I doing on? You know, and I thought they were picking on me or something, but that's just the way it turned out. I led the company up to about halfway up the hill. Platoon sergeant tapped me on the shoulder and said, stop, this is as far as we go. And the other company came through just as the first section stepped over a sort of line, you could almost say. The machine gun opened up and cut them all down almost, the whole goddamn section. And I was like one step from going around that corner. And we never did get up there that day. The Chinese took off, and we got up to the top without any more casualties, nothing. We got there, and the 4 Canadians that were killed were laying stripped of their clothes. Well, it's the first casualty that I'd seen that way. I mean, they had some other ones, but that was the first one I'd seen.
So how did that affect your nerves?
Didn't have time to think about it. I mean, yeah, kind of sorry to see 4 guys, but hey, glad it's not me, about the way you think after a while.
Did you think the Chinese were gone for good?
Yeah, it looked that way. It looked like they were going back to China or something, because they seemed to be pulling back. As soon as you hit them hard, they just disappear. But they had other plans, of course, as we all found out.
The withdrawal of the Chinese army is deceptive. In reality, over 400,000 communist troops are preparing for a massive counterstroke against the advancing UN forces. We're just coming into Kapyong village right now, and this is the location where the 2nd Patricius came in April 1951. And Dave, do you recognize it?
I don't see a thing I know, quite frankly. There was nothing here when I was here. It was just a couple of mud huts.
So what were you anticipating when you moved into this location?
The guys were enjoying the rest area, doing the normal stuff that they do there. That's when we got the order to move out. We knew we were in for something, but we didn't know it was that big. I mean, or as big as it turned out to be.
On April 22nd, the Chinese launch a massive offensive, breaking through the front at several points. The Patricias and the Australians are immediately ordered to dig in and prepare defensive positions astride the Kapyong River Valley. But it's a difficult position to defend. Hill 677 is a steep ridge, 1.5 miles across, and the Patricias have only 700 men to hold the final line, defending the road to Seoul. You can see that we're walking right up here, so right around this area.
Right.
And you guys are spread out on these major hills up over here.
Right.
Now you said that Stone went out and reconnoitered it beforehand, and he picked very specific positions.
Yeah, I think that was a big part of the action. I think if he hadn't come out in front here and had a look at it from the enemy's perspective, we probably would have been at a disadvantage. I think looking down from up there, down this way, wouldn't have had the same picture. So I think he's very smart that way.
The ones he picked seem to be very, very steep.
Yeah, they are. They're, I don't know how the Chinese figured they're ever going to get up there, because it is steep. I couldn't even climb it today, I don't think.
So when did you know the Chinese had arrived?
This valley was full of refugees and soldiers streaming south. Just hundreds and hundreds of people, and they're going as fast as their little legs can carry them, and we're still here, and you're saying, holy Christ, what are we doing here? You could see the bodies, and they were just absolutely terrified. They were wanting to get out of there. They didn't care how. They're walking, running, they're on trucks, they're hanging off the side, anything that's moving. And you really start to think about what's going to happen when your turn comes. and that road was just full of people. And when the Australians pulled out, they honked their horns and did all that stuff to get people to move out of the way, but if they didn't get out of the way, they just ran over them. And people were trying to climb on the trucks, and the Australians were beating them off with their rifle butts and stuff like that.
So only the patricians are blocking the road to Seoul.
Only us, yeah. We're the only ones left. And I think Stone made it pretty clear that when we were put up there, he wasn't going to go backwards. He was going to stay. It was stay or die.
As 20,000 ROC soldiers retreat southward, tens of thousands of Chinese troops pursue them, flooding the Kapyong River Valley. Now all that remains between the communists and the road to Seoul is the 700 men of the Princess Patricias.
This is your position over here. This is the back of B. And
Right.
you guys are up at the top there, looking out over the river valley.
Yeah.
What did you see?
Chinese troops coming down in formations, you know, like 6 abreast, walking down the road like they're out for a Sunday walk, but at a double trot. It was like the Roman legions coming down the road. And these guys are coming on like nothing was going to stop them. And we, you know, wondered if we could, I guess. I kind of forgotten what my thoughts were, but I think I was scared shitless just looking at them. And I think that we realized we're in for a good fight before the night was out. Waiting is the worst part of it. You don't know where they really are until they get up real close. I can remember firing my rifle, and I don't even know what I was shooting at. Because it looked like there was so many, I figured I couldn't miss anyway. I don't know how they managed to make those guys keep going. Just that part right there is so steep. My God, how did they get up there? Or how did they think they were going to get up there? But they sure as hell tried.
We are climbing up to the top of B Company's position to see if anything remains of the battle. It's very steep and there are no trails, so I doubt any Canadians have been up here since 1951.
This is the high point of B Company's position. It's right on the crest of the hill. And you can see here that there's slit trenches all over the place. So I guess it would be like a 2-man slit trench. Of course, it would be a lot deeper then. And they can mount their Brens on the top here. But what's amazing is how steep this hill is. I don't know how the Chinese would have got up here. They'd have to crawl up tree to tree. So you can see how the men could have rolled the grenades down or just kept the pepper fire on them. One of the problems with the Chinese was that they were very quiet. They had rubber shoes, they had cotton uniforms. They were very good at infiltration techniques. So often, even though the terrain was so difficult, they could surprise people. However, on the 24th, 25th of April, they weren't able to surprise the Princess Pats. And they really took it to them as they tried to force their way up these positions. But as the Chinese infiltrated, men further on the ground took care of them. There was a lot of heavy machine guns mounted on half-tracks down in the valley.
Stone's strategy for the defense of Kapyong is simply brilliant. One of his best decisions is to locate his half-tracks mounted with 30 and 50 caliber machine guns behind B Company's position. With the men manning the machine guns is Lieutenant Hub Gray.
It's an eerie sight. 500 men advancing towards us and not a discernible sound from any of them. It's as though we are watching unheralded ghosts intent upon harvesting their prey. I alert the men manning the 8 machine guns, telling them not to fire until I give the order. Their leading formation is about 40 meters short of the crest. After what seems an eternity, I ordered the machine guns to open fire.
We could hear when they cut loose with the machine guns down there. I'm sure they lost probably 4/5 of those people. A 50 caliber machine gun is, you know, it's about as big as your thumb. You go through 4 people before it stops. Take your head right off. Out of your sight, and after dark, you can't see. You just hear the noise over there. You really don't know what's going on. You hope it's all good. And of course, it turned out that most of it was.
We're on the peak of the hill that was B Company's position. This is one of the slit trenches, and here they fought off the Chinese attack on the night of 24-25 April 1951. But while this attack was going on, the Chinese were going to launch another attack against D Company on the hills right over here. This is the Kapyong River Gorge, and at this point, part of the communist forces split and went off to the left to attack Canadian positions at A Company, or particularly B Company, and a second group split off in this direction to try to take out the positions up on the heights over here. And some of the fiercest fighting took place at D Company's position right on that knob up there. The men are located on all the high points, and really, if the Chinese want them, they're going to have to come up and get them.
While the Chinese attacked the positions at B Company, another wave of communists sweep west and attack up the steep ridges leading to the Canadian positions on Hill 677. The Chinese realize if they can take the position on the heights, the whole Canadian line will collapse.
So we're trying to find a route up to 677, and so far we haven't found one, but this looks promising, but it's very, very steep.
저 위로 올라가는 길은 산으로 더 올라가는 길은 아예 없는 겁니까? 여기서 이제 등산로가 가들기라고 저 꼭대기라고 저 백등리 종족단이 가는 데가 있고요. 등산로가. And only from here there is a small trail walking up to the hill. So
Like up there?
you cannot drive. So from here you have to walk over.
This is one of the ridges that leads up towards 677. It's one of the few approaches that the Chinese could have taken. But if I'm one of the Chinese soldiers at this point, I'm thinking mutiny. This is an incredible hard climb, and I still got another couple hundred meters to go before I'm even going to meet the Canadians. And you can see how hard this would be, but you're talking maybe 50 men versus maybe 300-400. So the odds are stacked against the Patricias, but the terrain is in their favor. This is an amazing find. This appears to be one of the gun pits of 12th Platoon East. And the fact that, I mean, it's obviously sunk in by quite a lot, but it's located about 50 yards from the top of the hill. This is the correct location for it. There's 12th Platoon was split in two. The other part was on the other side of this ridge. This area was protected from 11th Platoon, which was up in this area here. As you can see, there's almost no chance for the Chinese to get up in this area. But this is a real piece of Canadian history. From here, they could have their Bren guns, and they had about 2 sections of men operating out of this area. But what's really happening, this area was safe, but on the other side of this ridge, things are going really bad, and there's some incredible fighting going on at 10 Platoon.
Fortunately, number 10 Platoon is commanded by an experienced Second World War veteran, Lieutenant Mike Levy. Throughout the early morning of the 25th, Levy's men repulse wave after wave of determined enemy attacks.
We've only walked over about, I don't know, 30 yards from the other position, and this is on the west side of the hill. 3 o'clock in the morning, they broke through here, and they put total attacks on Mike Levy's number 10 platoon. Now, this is all taking place, like I said, 3 o'clock in the morning. The Chinese are all over the place. Levy's defense of this position is quite exceptional, and in the end, he calls on a 40-minute bombardment on his own positions.
The artillery support is awesome. Without it, we could not sustain ourselves. The continuing attacks involve hundreds or even thousands of brave Chinese soldiers, seemingly exhibiting no fear of dying.
The standout of both 10 platoon and 12 platoon saved the day. They stopped the Chinese here cold. Even by the early morning, the Chinese were already starting to pull back. Maybe it was foolish that the Chinese even tried to take these positions, and in the end, they couldn't. They were outfought by the Canadians and their artillery. By the morning of April 25th, after 8 hours of heavy fighting, the Chinese stopped their attacks on the Canadians. The stubborn defense by the Patricias inflicts terrible casualties on the Chinese and prevents the communist breakthrough. Although the Patricias fight off an attacking force of 7,000 Chinese, they suffer remarkably few casualties, with only 10 killed and 23 wounded, a testament to the skill with which the position had been organized and defended. The stand by the Patricias at Kapyong was exceptional, but it took a Korean to truly respect their achievement by raising a monument to their memory. It is no accident that this man who so honors the Canadians is himself a survivor of the Korean War, Kapyong. This is an amazingly sincere gesture by the Korean people to remember the Canadians, and it's very touching as a Canadian to come back and to see this. It's deeply touching.
Well, not only the Canadians, even Koreans, we got to remember. I mentioned the battle map. That's the 250 CLI sector. 677, right there.
When I come to a place like this and I see where I was on this stone and I can look up at the hill there and see the actual spot, it's powerful. It's very moving, and you start to remember some things that you kind of like to have forgotten. But it is really, really great to see this. It's wonderful. It's a great tribute to the Canadian people from you. Thank you.
Before we leave, I want to present to the Korean War veterans to this stone, this present to your all the battlefield stone.
Thank you so much.
Killed at Kapyong, Maurice Carr, Gerald Evans, Leslie Fielding, Leo Gladieux, Curtis Hayes, Joseph Lassard, Earl McCaskill, Bruce McDonald, Walter Marshall, Robert Tolver, Robert Walker, Thomas Wotton.
I look at the place where we were and remember what happened there. Remember the people that died there. And sometimes it's tough to talk about it. You keep saying to yourself, why me? How come I'm still here? And there isn't an answer. You can't answer it. You don't know why.
The battle fought by the Patricias in these hills was a magnificent defensive action, and in the history of the Canadian Army is probably one of the best small unit actions ever fought. And over the next few months, the Patricians will be joined by thousands of other Canadian soldiers as they start to drive north, over more hills, through more valleys, and into North Korea. This is a rice paddy in Korea, and you can see the hills behind me, and the trees and the ridges, and this is the type of terrain that the Canadians fought over in Korea. At the end of 1951, the character of the Korean War changed completely. It went from open warfare to static warfare, a war of entrenched positions and massed artillery support, but it was no less bloody. For the Canadians who served here in 1952 and 53, the Korean War was a war of waiting, watching, and patrolling.
We were going down into the valley. We were almost there, and we saw these shadows coming up at us. Lieutenant Sykes turned to me, and he whispered, "There's 3 Chinese just ran across the path." It was like walking into a wall, where you think you're going to maybe get hit with something any moment. You're as afraid as you'll ever be in your life, because you think this is maybe death coming in the next couple of seconds.
We're driving out of Seoul north towards the demilitarized zone, and what's clear in Korea is that they're still on a war footing. You can see barbed wire entanglements all along the river. There's guard posts, and you can see gun emplacements and bunkers all over the place. In military terms, Seoul is a very vulnerable city. It's only about 30 to 40 kilometers from North Korea, and therefore it could be hit by all sorts of weaponry. And it's sort of a strange contrast to see all this military equipment and fortifications living side by side with such a vibrant city. So we're still on the highway north of Seoul, but we're getting closer to the junction of the Han and the Imjin rivers, which means that the communists are about a kilometer away across the river. So you see a lot more military positions. And just over there, you'll see an embedded tank. I'm not going to point to it because I don't think they'd appreciate us filming them. But you can just look over my shoulder, and this is an example of what we're going to see from here on up to the DMZ. This is another example of military preparations in South Korea, and this is a tank block. You can see that it looks like an overpass, but in fact, it's got 2 columns. And in the event of a North Korean attack, they would blow the columns, and this giant slab of concrete would come right down. And of course, this would block the road, stopping all North Korean armor. We're now passing through the restricted zone, which is a higher level of military preparedness. And then we're going to go up into the demilitarized zone itself. And the area we're interested in are the hills that were captured by the Canadians in 51 and held through 1952 and 53. And what's remarkable is the South Koreans today are using exactly the same positions, the same locations as the Canadians held back in the Korean War. And it's amazing to me that the line has not moved forward in more than 50 years. Since the fall of 1951, all along the UN front, the Korean War has devolved into a stalemate.
Hundreds of thousands of men on both sides dig in, fortify positions, and prepare for a different kind of war. In October 1952, 3 Canadian battalions are holding frontline positions north of the Samichon River. And as they did almost a year before, Canadian troops once again move into positions on the strategically important Hill 355. The war had gone quite quiet in 1952. There had been very few major Chinese attacks on the Canadian positions. Even by October, for 10 months, everything had gone quite well. Casualties had mounted. There's patrolling and mortar shells, always some action. It wasn't until 3 weeks into October that the next major action took place. This is the infamous Hill 355. The honor of holding this position went to the Royal Canadian Regiment, and on about the 17th of October, they started to notice a lot more communist artillery fire and mortar fire coming in on their positions, and particularly ranging their positions, which is always a bad sign. The Chinese always used infiltration techniques, so they would try to find a weak point, and then of course they would plan it in advance. These attacks are very well planned. Both sides know the peace negotiations are going on, and I don't think either side wanted to risk too much. And this was true of the Chinese. Gone were the days of the massive attacks across minefields. Now they were far more concerned about the preservation of their own lives. But they would determine where the weak points were, and they would often work at night even to remove mines and make pass-through minefields or cut barbed wire to try to get in. In this situation, the Chinese had infiltrated around the position and even dug advanced bunkers as jump-off positions so that they could move very quickly. The UN controlled the air, and they also had an advantage in artillery, so whatever the Chinese did, it had to be quick. So they had to get into your position right away. So they'd move up as many men as they could, maybe 100, 200 men into these positions, and once the artillery fire ended for them, they're through the wire.
I got halfway up the trench, and we had Chinese coming over the wall. Somebody started to fire, and I picked up fire with my Sten gun. Emptied that off. Then we just tossed them over the side of the trench.
Hundreds of Chinese attacked the Canadians with the intent of killing as many as possible. They overrun the forward platoons. Now the Canadians have no choice but to bring down artillery on their own positions. All along these hills, the artillery, the tanks, the mortars, everything is letting loose on the Chinese. So about 1 a.m. in the morning on the 23rd, the RCRs go back to their position and the artillery has done its job. And they've cleared out the Chinese. They made their point. They wanted to inflict some pain on the Canadians, and they had moved out. The Chinese raid on Hill 355 cost the 1st RCRs 35 wounded and 18 men killed. The costliest battle for the Canadians to date in Korea. The battle that took place on Hill 355 in October 1952 was a bloody nose for the Royal Canadian Regiment. But an attack on such a position should have been expected. 355 is the most important position in this sector, and the communists would dearly love to have a piece of it. Every sector had their own special piece, special linchpin. And within a month, the Canadians would get a taste of another infamous piece of the line, and it was called the hook. One of the problems with the Korean War is that the battles were all fought in a tight area of ridges and ravines that I can't tell apart. And it's very difficult, going from a map from 1950, to be absolutely positive you got the right positions. The other thing is that there's only limited access to a lot of these positions because most of them are in the DMZ.
or very close to it. So with the cooperation of the South Korean Army, we're going to try to get into there and see what we can find on what was known as the old hook positions.
오케이. 지금 출발하세요. 우리 10명입니다.
Where is he going? Where is he going? I'm not sure.
It's a little difficult to try to establish from the old maps onto the new maps to make sure we end up in the same right place. This is a very complicated area. The terrain is very difficult. There's lots of ridges and bumps, and it's very hard to read. So now we got to make sure we're going to go to the right place.
Oh, okay. They don't have a no peep position here. They're going to bring us here. That's the closest they can bring us.
Okay.
Okay?
So this we're going to get up. The closest we can get is the what is marked as the B Company position here. But at the same time, we should get a really clear view across the Samishan River Valley to see the other Canadian positions towards Hill 355. So it'll be quite interesting to see what we can see from here. Most of the battlefields of the Canadians in Korea are in the demilitarized zone. So we're going into what is really a battle zone. And we're going to be escorted by a patrol of South Korean soldiers all the way up. And I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be interesting. We've got an escort with us. And we're going right into the DMZ, into the GP post that's close to the hook. So we're going to have to stop filming in a couple seconds because we're getting close to one of the defensive positions. So we're going to be going up to the top of the hill, which is, of course, it's going to be the outpost, or the GP they call it here, which is in the middle of the demilitarized zone. It also was a Canadian battlefield. So we're going to try and find the hook positions as closely as we can. So from there, we'll be able to see the North Korean positions of today, as well as the Communist Chinese positions of 1951-52. So it's sort of going back in time a little bit, but the tension is still there. I just wonder how long this can go on for.
여기서 요쪽을 배경으로 찍으시면 됩니다. 여기 요쪽. 저쪽은 안 되고 저기가 적 GP거든요.
That's the North Korean post over there?
That is the enemy post.
This point, so we're here, yeah, 248, and that's
Okay.
that's 132 is that right there.
Now here is North Korea zone.
Yep.
We can't go there.
Oh yeah, or one way.
Right.
Here is called HID Hill. HID Hill. Do you know HID?
HID? No.
HID is a special forces of South Korean to infiltrate to North Korea. You know the noise, the explosion?
Yes.
Just before you heard? That is the noise of mine explosion. The animal.
Oh, an animal's gone on the mine.
Yeah. Pressed the mine, so mine brought up.
Okay. It's good to know it's not.
Yeah.
조심해야 됩니다. 그래서 길이 아닌 곳은 절대 다니지 않고 있어요, 우리가.
So you have to be very careful not to go the minefield because there is only road sign. There is a triangle
There's red
sign.
triangles.
Red triangles saying the minefield. So you don't have to. You shouldn't go there.
요게 그 연천평야고
이게 3.2천.
삼이천.
Commission River.
예.
Yeah.
삼이천.
So we're looking over here.
Yeah.
예. 이게 잘못됐어. Wrong. This line is wrong.
Yeah, this is old. This is from
Okay.
1952.
Now here.
Up here, okay, right at 355. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
It's hard when you use the old maps, see? In the winter of 1952, the Hook was the UN's most important position in the sector west of the Samishan River. Consequently, it received special attention from the Chinese, who were only 300 yards away and within easy striking distance. The men defending the Hook had to be constantly on guard, watching for signs of an impending communist attack. This position was very, very important because if they could take the Hook, they could literally outflank some of the other positions, which you can see off to the right, which is all down the line here, which is where the Canadians were for most of the Korean War. And so it was always very important that this position be held. But the battle we're interested in is the one that took place in November 1952, which is the first action of the 3rd Battalion, Princess Patricia's. The Hook was held by the Black Watch, the Royal Highlanders, and they were very fortunate to be the men who were in support of them. So they're actually in these little valleys over here. They had 2 companies, and the companies were in consecutive order. So if anything went wrong, they would move up into varying positions. And what happened on the night of the 18th and 19th November, the Chinese put down a lot of artillery fire and cut the position off. And of course, they went after the Warsaw position, which was the lead one. So the Patricians, they had to come up through these little valleys, move up into position, and then launch the attack to help recapture the position.
It takes a long time to draw close to the Hook. The great explosions are unending. Just above my head, I know the air is filled with jagged, searing shrapnel. We come on 2 sandbag bunkers. There's a huge mound of earth to our left, dumped by high explosive shells. A Scout's booted feet jut grotesquely from its center. We move forward, tread on bodies in the bottom of the trench. I'm scared now. The reality of battle death came the instant I saw the bodies of the Scouts.
To their credit, they came up through here, and by the time they had arrived, another unit of the Black Watch had recaptured the position, so they were able to drive off the communists. But you can see from here as well, you get a really nice view of the communist positions, and they're much closer here. This river valley is much more narrow than this Samishan. And of course, after that position, until 53, early 53, the Canadians patrolled this position and went out into the lines and ran into a few problems there. But when they knocked the communists back in November, it sort of calmed them down a little bit. But this area of the Samishan Valley was where all the patrols used to go out. And it's also where the Canadians suffered most of their casualties during the Korean War. For example, I would say, out of the 400 or so that were killed, 350, 370 were killed in this area along here. This is where the Canadians took all their casualties. All along the Samishan, throughout 1952 and 1953, the static war grinds on. And as the peace talks drag at Panmunjom, life for the men in the line becomes routine, often tedious, but always dangerous, with death never very far away. We are on the road north of Seoul, approaching the DMZ. We're going up to Hill 187, which was a battlefield for many of the Canadians who fought in Korea. During the Korean War, Canadian troops served overseas for a 12-month period, and then they would be rotated out and new troops would come in. And one of the soldiers in the 3rd Battalion, Royal Canadian Regiment, was Terry Maher. And Terry, can you explain how you decided to come to Korea?
I, like a lot of the fellows at the time, grew up with a lot of heroes in our towns and villages from the Second World War. And there was a certain amount of romanticism in me, as it was with a lot of the volunteers that came over here.
So when you landed in South Korea, you started to make your way up?
We went up in what is called the Busan Express, And it's an old steam engine, and the car's all close together, and small seats built for Orientals, and I'm over 6 feet. The train was surrounded by Korean kids, and they were always saying Shushan Joe, 25 cents, pack of cigarettes, and so forth. We felt quite sorry for them, and we gave them what we had. The train started to pull out, and the little kids put the rocks to the train, and some of the rocks were coming through the window, and so we were ducking down as the train pulled out.
So now we're on the route up the Hill 187. It's now an established position for the South Korean Army. Same locations as you guys chose. We'll be able to get a clear view of the old no man's land, which is still the no man's land.
Right.
The Chinese positions, everything except now it's North Koreans. Yeah. So much hasn't changed.
I hope I recognize it, because I was over all of it and all of the valleys. I think I spent most of last night thinking about dead people.
So Terry, do you recognize this place?
What I recognize quite well, or impressed with, just looking at it, is the hills, the Chinese hills in the foreground, how they fold up and higher, and they get darker and darker as they go into the background. I always thought it was quite foreboding. Chinese hills were right across the valley, and I always thought they were 300 or 400 yards from the front. From the sharp end positions where Charlie Company was. We'd be in the front line anywhere from 30 days to 2 months. On Hill 187 here, I was on here for, I think, 58 days. There was no civilization up here, and there was a person lived on his wits and his reputation. There was a natural leadership that took over up here. The most dominant thing was the fear of the Chinese, and the second thing, almost as bad, was the cold, and it dominated everybody's existence. And there was always you got a wind here now. There was always a cold wind coming from the north, and it cut through, and you couldn't put your parkas up because you couldn't hear the shells coming in. Sitting in your slit trenches here, and in other positions too, they would have a loudspeaker would come from across the valley over there, and somewhere back of 166. And it would start off with very sentimental music. It would be American music or Canadian music, and very, very sentimental. And it would be always a woman's voice singing to you.
It always hurts to say goodbye. Why do we try to hide the pain in our hearts?
They always called us Americans, and say they would start off American officers.